Welcome to the Townsend Center for the Performing Arts on the campus of the University of West Georgia. We're happy to have so many of you here this evening. Welcome to those of you who are here as a member of a group to whom we sent out invitations. Welcome to those of you who are here as participants in the 28th Annual Interdisciplinary Conference in the Humanities, which will be taking place over the next 2 days on campus. And welcome to those of you from the university community and the greater Carrollton community who put your costumes off early this evening to step into the theater and join us. We appreciate your being here. We started this series just last year under the general title of The Shape of the Humanities in Higher Education. Since last year's event, it seems hardly a week has passed without some notice in the national media, print or otherwise, about the decline of the humanities and a great deal of worry about the crisis in the humanities. And if you happen to see just this morning in the New York Times, there was a front page story about just that thing, and I was struck by it once again, and so I wanted to pull one passage from it. The chairwoman of Harvard's History and Literature program, in an interview, talks about a young woman who came to her woman quite enthusiastic for an event for students interested in the program and was quickly deluged with messages from her parents. They kept texting her things like, "Leave right now. Get out of there. That is a house of pain." Those of us who labor in the humanities are not at all surprised by the attitude, though we might be a little surprised by the ferocious tone in some of it. But I've been thinking about this all day, and it occurred to me that I might rather be associated with a house of pain than a house that was considered superfluous altogether. We might be able to begin dialogue with people who might not want to dialogue so readily if we are seen as a threat rather than as a nothing. And so I'm happy and honored that our event this evening has been chosen for a sponsored discussion of the heart of the matter, the report of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences that was released last June, I believe, 2 years. Let me pause to thank the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the Federation of State Humanities Councils, the Georgia Humanities Council, and the Georgia Public Library Service for their support in putting this evening's programs together. They've been wonderful to work with. The heart of the matter was commissioned as a result of a bipartisan request from Congress. I think that might have been the last bipartisan act from Congress we've seen in quite some time. They'd asked the question of the American Academy, and it went like this: what are the top actions that Congress, state governments, universities, foundations, educators, individuals, benefactors, and others should take now to maintain national excellence in humanities and social scientific scholarship and education, and to achieve long-term national goals for our intellectual and economic well-being, for a stronger, more vibrant civil society, and for the success of cultural diplomacy in the 21st century? In response, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences put together a commission of 53 prominent national figures from industry, from the arts, from the sciences, from academe, and it was truly an eclectic body of folk. And the result is our topic tonight, the heart of the matter, humanities and social sciences. So let me move on now to introduce our panelists. Since 2008, Dr. Wayne Clough has served as secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, heading a complex of 19 museums and galleries, 20 libraries, the National Zoo, and a number of research centers with reach into nearly 100 countries. Dr. Clough has brought to the Smithsonian the same visionary and strategic leadership he demonstrated during his 14-year tenure as president of the Georgia Institute of Technology. Secretary Clough holds bachelor's and master's degrees in civil engineering from Georgia Tech and a doctorate in civil engineering from the University of California, Berkeley. His specialty is in geotechnical and earthquake engineering. He's taught at Duke and Stanford, and he served as Dean of the College of Engineering at Virginia Tech and as Provost of the University of Washington. Among his many recognitions, and he's had many awards in his own field, but beyond that, he has received the Foreign Policy Association Medal, the American-Russian Cultural Cooperation Foundation Award, and the Joseph M. Pettit Alumni Distinguished Service Award for lifetime leadership, achievement, and service to Georgia Tech. He was also a member of the commission that produced The Heart of the Matter. Rosanna Warren is the Hannah Holborn Gray Distinguished Service Professor in the Committee of Social Thought at the University of Chicago. Generally considered one of the strongest poets of her generation, her most recent volume, Ghost in a Red Hat, was published in 2011. She has been honored by the Academy of American Poets, the American Academy of Arts and Letters, the Lila Wallace Foundation, the Guggenheim Foundation, and the New England Poetry Club. Program note, Professor Warren will read from her own poetry tomorrow night on campus in Cashin Hall. We hope many of you can make it to that event as well. Robert Schaefer is chair of the Department of Political Science and Planning at the University of West Georgia. Dr. Schaefer's teaching and research interests are focused on American government, particularly American political rhetoric, with emphasis on the presidency and American political organizations. He also teaches literature and politics with a special interest in Shakespeare. And I've been fortunate enough to be invited to Bob's class on literature and politics a number of times, and it's always exciting. His textbook, American Political Rhetoric, was recently published in its 5th edition. And Bob pointed out to me how amused he was lately to discover that it was a featured prop in a low-grade movie set on campus life, okay? Set on a campus. So as he puts it, his 15 minutes, okay? Esther Mackintosh is president of the Federation of State Humanities Councils. And Esther, thanks so much for your help in putting this together. She holds a BA in English and German from Morningside College and a PhD in American Literature from Kansas State University. She has served as editor-in-chief of Horticulture magazine in Boston, and later she served as senior editor at Science 80, a science magazine for lay audiences published by the American Association for the Advancement of Science. She was also a scriptwriter in the audiovisual department of the King Faisal Specialist Hospital in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Welcome to all our panelists. Thank you. Our procedure will be to allow each some time for opening remarks, after which they will respond to each other for a time, and we hope, time permitting, to open a little bit later a mic for the audience to participate and ask questions if you wish. So this is a good time for me to tell everybody we are on film, and the film will be distributed publicly. Okay, so we've concluded that as a member of the commission, the secretary is in a good position to come last in the rotation, so we begin with Professor Warren.
Is this working? Yes, thank you. I salute the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the authors of the report, The Heart of the Matter. To put this noble endeavor in perspective, this document, defending the inquiry into human nature and the quest for values, is a perennial plant. It's not working? Okay, it's annoying. All right. It's a perennial plant. The same effort springs up in every generation as it needs to be argued over and over again that reality cannot be construed only in materialistic, mechanical, and utilitarian terms. It is an argument over the nature of the good. What makes a fully realized life? What makes an ethical life? What makes good politics? Why should we care? In the West, one could go back to Homer and the concept of paideia, the aristocratic training in heroic virtue, for one version of the heart of the matter. But we find a model closer to our own civilization and one from which our word, the humanities, directly derives, in the humanism of the Renaissance, and a supreme example in Sir Philip Sidney, the poet, courtier, diplomat, soldier, cherished in the court of Queen Elizabeth, and intensely mourned when he died in battle at age 32. Most of us know Sidney today for the first sonnet cycle in English, Astrophel and Stella. Specialists know his pastoral works, the Old Arcadia and New Arcadia, and the verse translations of the Psalms he did with his sister, the gifted poet Mary Sidney, Countess of Pembroke. His eloquent defense of poetry, which specifically focuses on the art of poetry, set many of the terms by which humanities more generally would be defended for centuries. He argues for the moral and inspirational power of art. Poetry excites the imagination, Sidney claims, so that its hearers may know that goodness whereunto they are moved. A profound statement linking knowledge and inspiration. We must first be moved, and then we will be open to knowledge. And we are moved as whole beings through the imagination. For who will be taught if he be not moved with the desire to be taught? Asks Sidney. 2.5 centuries later, Shelley elaborated the argument in his defense of poetry. Like Sidney, Shelley writes specifically of poetry, but his understanding of the art is so capacious that it transcends the formal idea of verse and includes even the essays of Bacon. The imagination is the great instrument of moral good, asserts Shelley, a claim one can overhear today in arguments by Martha Nussbaum and others. Contrasting quantitative and instrumental knowledge to the synthesizing and evaluating powers of the imagination, Shelley argues, we want, in the sense of we lack, the creative faculty to imagine that which we know. We want the generous impulse to act that which we imagine. We want the poetry of life. Our calculations have outrun conception. We have eaten more than we can digest. These cautions ring still more truly in our age of information overload, as does Shelley's warning about valuing matter over spirit, external over internal life. He writes, the cultivation of those sciences which have enlarged the limits of the empire of man over the external world has, for want of the poetical faculty, proportionally circumscribed those of the internal world, and man, having enslaved the elements, remains himself a slave. When the Academy's report concludes by quoting Senator Fulbright on the importance of empathy, the ability to see the world as others see it, it renews ideas we recognize from Sidney and Shelley. When the report explains that we study the humanities to understand, quote, not just what, but how and why, it similarly translates venerable ideas into the language of the present and makes good on the report's conclusion that we need to understand the past in order to understand and manage change and ensure a decent future. Rather than rehearsing the report's contents, I'd like to emphasize a few points from it that strike me as particularly compelling. Very rightly, the report calls for more support for teachers in K through 12 and laments that different levels of teachers work in isolation from one another, that education in K through 12 is treated as having no relation to college education. And yet it is all one ecosystem. How often has one heard one's colleagues in universities snarling or whining about their poorly prepared students? If those students are poorly prepared, we all bear some responsibility, and the Academy is imaginative in suggesting ways to change that. College and university professors could be much more involved in continuing education and enrichment programs for teachers, like the NEH Summer Seminars, Teachers as Scholars in Boston, or the Dallas Institute. Furthermore, the report rightly advises that standards be raised for teacher training and that teachers should be educated in the subjects they teach. Is that such an extraordinary demand? The report recommends that graduate students in the humanities be prepared more flexibly to work in many different kinds of jobs. They will not all find work as professors, but their advanced study could open a wide range of significant work for them in publishing, nonprofit organizations, museums, libraries, and schools other than universities. I found refreshing the report's call for the creation of a culture corps to enlist the talents of humanists, retired or not, to volunteer in schools, civic centers, elsewhere, to reach out to people hungry for literacy, the arts, the general life of culture. People are hungry for culture. Such programs could transform individual lives and the lives of communities, especially suffering communities, and could have that liberating effect Shelley called for. And now for a few warnings. We live in an intensely commercial culture, and almost nothing is not for sale in the United States by someone trying to make a buck. School reform is no different. Because we've been riled recently by scary reports about the state of our public schools, and some of those concerns I consider legitimate, and others are tendentious and don't acknowledge the wide variation in our schools' performance or the fact that poorly functioning schools correlate with poor and ethnically isolated communities. We've created a gold rush for entrepreneurs in education technology. Wild promises are being made for hugely expensive software programs, integrated curricula, and computer hardware, tablets, and so forth, though little evidence connects them with real learning. Should we be surprised that Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation, through its subsidiary company Amplify, run by Joel Klein, ex-chancellor of the New York City Public Schools, has rushed in to shove computerized curriculum and tablets into school systems across the country, taking a large part of the energy and responsibility for teaching out of the hands of teachers? And this is only one such venture. Others are roaring ahead because big money beckons. Equally misguided, in my view, is the utilitarian fervor of the Common Core and its haywire insistence on cutting the amount of imaginative literary reading for K-12 students by 50% to replace it with, quote, informational texts. A tract on the business of wall insulation is one scintillating example, well calculated to ignite the imagination of 12-year-olds. For who will be taught if he be not moved with the desire to be taught? Asked Sidney. An even more egregious example of this kind of soul-destroying so-called reform was the report issued last year by the Council on Foreign Relations, co-chaired, yes, by Joel Klein and Condoleezza Rice. This document, entitled U.S. School Reform and National Security, argued, rather hysterically, that U.S. education is so bad we can't recruit enough qualified soldiers or security analysts for the armed forces, that because we must, sick in their words, maintain global dominance, not a goal all of us share in this republic, the entire educational system should be refashioned to produce better soldiers. These are terrible ideas. The United States is not Sparta, and we shouldn't subject our polis and our paideia to an endless military mission. Nor, frankly, should we aim to make everybody's life goal to become part of the machinery of the gross national product, though that is what is implied in the Council on Foreign Relations report with its enlightened way of referring to human beings. That means teachers and students as human capital. Thank you, I don't want to be invested that way. Our schools do, many of them, need reform, and our teachers need support, but not on those terms. The humanities are about what it has meant and may mean to be human. They are about human beings, not capital. And I would accentuate that word being, treating it less as a noun than as a verb, an action, a process of coming to be. We come to be. We come into our humanness in what Martin Buber called the I-thou relationship. And one crucial version of that relationship takes place in the classroom. It's the essence of education, teacher and student looking each other in the eye, recognizing one another, the teacher igniting in the young person's imagination who she might be and how the world might be revealed in its scope, complexity, majesty, and promise. We should not let momentary panic induce us to annihilate the possibility of those relationships and wipe out rich traditions of teaching to enslave ourselves to corporate money machines and prefab curricula and yet more screen time. That is not how to awaken free minds. I conclude with a few lines, perhaps mysterious, by the poet James Merrill. Mystery is good. It delivers us from wrong-headed and coercive clarities. The poem is The Broken Home, from the book Nights and Days. Merrill has been describing his solitary adult life and remembering his childhood, his parents' divorce, and a mysterious scene in which the little boy, led by his dog, the satyr-thighed red setter, disturbs his mother in her nap. The parents have long since died at the time of the poem, and their grand house has become a school. The real house became a boarding school. Under the ballroom ceiling's allegory, someone may at last be actually allowed to learn something. or from my window, cool with the unstiflement of the entire story, watch a red setter stretch and sink in cloud. How, at any age, do we learn anything? And what is worth learning? The Academy has performed a deeply civic act in compiling this report to stimulate us as citizens to take up again the age-old questions and to take an active role in shaping a civilization we might be proud of. Thank you.
Please go ahead, Bob.
That's good. A prefatory comment. I'm going to be somewhat troublesome. Why? Here we are, late in the evening, a small group of people thinking about the humanities. Meanwhile, everyone else is at the football game. One wonders, why is this so? My real concern is that those in this room are all on the same page. That is to say, strong supporters, cheerleaders of the liberal arts. And just for the record, I conflate liberal arts and humanities. Being so is a good thing, and let there be no confusion. I am one of the cheerleaders. But this is problematic. How do we connect those who are genuinely concerned with education, and in my perspective, higher education, to those very busy with everyday lives? My goal is not to say things about those who are not here, but to talk about us. We are a minority. We have a problem. So I begin. Recently, earlier this year, the University System of Georgia Chancellor, Hank Huckabee, declared, and I quote, "If you can't get a job and you majored in drama, there's probably a reason." He then added, "Students are studying the wrong things." Obviously, this caused quite a stir with small minorities, people in this room. But to understand the Chancellor's remarks, we must recognize the intense political pressure that he and countless others are under, and I'm referring to parents and legislators and etc. To wit, many people ask, are college degrees overrated? Are taxpayers getting a good return for the billions of dollars being poured into higher education? Are graduates, are you ready, insured jobs? But we need to back up one step and remind ourselves that we live in a democracy, not an aristocracy. Those of us with democratic souls tend to be much more practical, more pragmatic. We do not spend much time reflecting upon the good or the beautiful. Rather, we must, in light of our circumstances, be concerned with producing wealth. Food, shelter, medical needs are not incidental, but fundamental. And in our free time, we watch football. To complicate matters, the media likes to sensationalize quirky courses that occasionally show up in class bulletins in colleges around the United States. By way of example, the adultery novel In and Out of Russia, University of Pennsylvania. At the University of Wisconsin, The Vampire in Literature and Cinema. At the University of Rochester, my hometown, something called Alien Sex. And at Cornell, cyberfeminism. What does all this lead to? It leads to someone like Senator Jeff Sessions 3 days ago, who wrote a letter to the NEH wondering why they're spending money and giving out grants for programs entitled, "What is the Meaning of Life?" What a waste of money. We must also be attuned to the more fundamental problem. Here's where I get troublesome. The liberal arts are a danger to the city. A close reading of Plato's Apology reminds us that Socrates, the person who brought philosophy down from the heavens, according to Xenophon, the person who popularized the liberal arts, is in fact guilty of corrupting the youth. Socrates spent most of his life detaching the youth from the opinions and beliefs of their parents. We are also reminded of the possible danger of the liberal arts by the great poet Aristophanes. He was a contemporary of Socrates and a drama major. His popular play, The Clouds, shows that the pursuit of philosophy, liberal arts, humanities, and the natural sciences does indeed threaten the traditions of the city and therefore of the city itself. Pheidippides, a student of Socrates, one of the main characters in The Clouds, learns from Socrates that it is appropriate to beat his foolish father. Pheidippides even threatens to beat his mother. On the other hand, Socratic inquiry, the liberal arts, can be a very, very good thing. We learn this from Martin Luther King, who 50 years ago, but 100 miles due west of here, over in Birmingham, wrote in a letter from Birmingham jail, quote, "Socrates felt that it was necessary to create a tension in the mind so that individuals could rise from the bondage of myths and half-truths to the unfettered realm of creative analysis and objective appraisal. We must see the need of having nonviolent gadflies to create the kind of tension in society that will help men to rise from the dark depths of prejudice and racism to the majestic heights of understanding and brotherhood." So, jumping ahead, does this mean that the University of West Georgia, with its liberal arts core curriculum, is a threat to Carrollton? I think not. Nonetheless, it's important to keep in mind that genuine inquiry calls into question our fundamental beliefs, and this is problematic. How might Socrates respond to the Commission's report, The Heart of the Matter? Most likely, he'd appreciate it. Why? The report strongly promotes an educated population, an education consisting more than just practical skills. The Commission also strongly supports, and I quote, "preparation of citizens," end quote. All of this is good. As for my own thoughts about the heart of the matter, because of limited time, I shall only address one concern: the Common Core State Standards Initiative, which is referred to in the report. The Commission, quote, "applauds the thinking behind this plan." But then the Commission adds, "It is too soon to predict all the outcomes that will result from nationwide implementation." The Commission is somewhat hesitant to support the Common Core too much. I, too, applaud the thinking behind the Common Core. Why? It's much better than No Child Left Behind, a disaster. However, I am hesitant about taking the Common Core too seriously. No matter what, the core seems to necessitate assessment test. I don't want to get into a big debate now about standardized testing, other than to say that true education is a relationship of a particular teacher and a particular student. Standardized tests ignore or deny the idiosyncratic nature of human beings. Teachers must be afforded the flexibility and the trust to work with particular students, all of whom approach and understand life differently. I should add that true education is also a dialogue, a dialectic, about the good, the just, and the beautiful. Education is not, at its core, a test. I conclude with a thoughtful quote about higher education. It is from a speech given 2 years ago by a Georgia public official. But as essential as our role is for future economic well-being of our students, there is another equally important role we play. We not only teach and train students for work, but we help prepare them for life, regardless of their career path. We teach students how to think critically. We educate students on how to analyze and interpret complex issues. We prepare students to work with others, often very different in nationality, thought, and culture. We expose those students to their responsibilities as citizens in community life. The author, USG Chancellor Hank Huckabee. I very much agree with what the Chancellor says and hope that we all continue down this path. If so, we will all be better off. No, this is one last obnoxious, troublesome comment. A deference to science and technology and to my iPhone. I just want everyone to know, thanks to Brian McCrary, a great IT guy at West Georgia, that Florida Tech 0, UWG 7. Thank you.
Well, I'm a visitor here, and besides that, an out-of-stater, so I'm not going to make any trouble whatsoever. In fact, I am mainly here to say thank you. We are indebted to the Commission on the Humanities and Social Sciences for many reasons, and in these remarks I will catalog some of those reasons, partly as a way of personally saying thank you to the Commission and the Academy, and partly as a way of framing my own observations about the state of the humanities at this moment. First, I think I can speak for the entire humanities community in saying how grateful we are to the Commission for releasing a report, The Heart of the Matter, that has prompted more public discussion about the condition and value of the humanities than we have seen in years, maybe ever. The Commission website lists more than 130 op-eds and articles commenting on the findings of the report or using the report as a launch pad for talking about the humanities. These pieces, which included a thoughtful and insightful reflection by Randy Hendricks and Tommy Cox, have appeared in publications ranging from relatively small state newspapers to the largest national media outlets. The arguments presented are diverse and powerful. The humanities are essential, the writers of these articles say, because they promote self-discovery, cultural awareness, and careful thinking. Because they enlarge understanding by taking us to other worlds and times. Because they help the economy by producing a workforce capable of nimble, innovative thinking. Because they produce more engaged citizens. Because, said one editorial, the humanities are the glue that makes our nation one. These have been a heartening shot in the arm for those of us who work in the Academy and in the nonprofit cultural sector. They've helped sharpen our collective arguments in support of the humanities, and they have even, in some cases, helped us crystallize our own thinking about why we do what we do. Honing these arguments and articulating these understandings is a perpetual task for all of us. To give a very personal example, in a recent conversation with two longtime friends, my former graduate school roommate and her husband, Anne and I, English majors both, were citing, as we often do, all the ways the world would be improved if more people had studied or were simply involved with the humanities. Anne's attorney husband, Jim, who has sat in on his share of these conversations, said he was embarrassed to admit that if pressed, he really wouldn't be able to say for certain what the humanities are or do. Oh my goodness, don't be embarrassed about that, I said. Even for those of us who have been at it for years, it is an ongoing topic of conversation. So at many levels, I am grateful to the Commission for expanding that conversation. A particularly encouraging aspect of this flurry of commentary prompted by the report is its vivid demonstration that, in fact, the humanities are alive and well, and not just among those of us who make our living practicing and defending them. Despite what recent events might suggest, many members of Congress actually believe strongly in the value of the humanities. 70 House members and 30 senators belong to caucuses built around that belief. It is difficult to find a successful business person who does not understand the benefit of a workforce with a strong grounding in the liberal arts. The most brilliant scientists recognize that communication and critical thinking skills that the humanities add to scientific reasoning. And citizens in communities all across the country embrace the opportunities for humanities learning that helps them put their own and their community's challenges into a context that allows them to draw on the lessons of other times and places. The Commission has given us a great gift in bringing this conversation so vigorously into the public realm. But the Commission has done us another service through this report and the information gathering forums around the country that fed into it. They have given us a view of the humanities as a continuum, and this is the second thing for which we must all be very grateful. The report not only demonstrates the need for strong humanities education in K through 12 in our colleges and universities and on through the rest of our lives, it also stresses over and over the interconnectedness of all of these phases of education and the need for collaboration among all its parts. The report envisions a humanities landscape that is anything but a collection of gerrymandered districts or gated communities. It calls on all of us to pool our collective wisdom and efforts, drawn from whichever sector we happen to inhabit, and to help build the nation we wish to live in. The goals of the report, and I quote, invite all stakeholders, public and private alike, to embrace a new commitment to collaboration and a new sense of mutual obligation to the role of the humanities and social sciences for a vibrant democracy. Achieving and maintaining this collaborative spirit is not as easy as it might seem. I do not have sufficient experience with the relationship between K through 12 educators and the Academy, so thank you, Rosanna, to comment on the level of mutual support there, but I've had a great deal of experience in my varied career with the sometimes uneasy relationship between the Academy and the public and the organizations that represent each. This has to do in part with resources. And here I will take a detour to thank the Commission for a third gift, which is their clear and vigorous assertion that the humanities at all levels must have more money. I don't recall ever before seeing a major national report that included as one of its section headings in 18-point type a demand to increase funding for the NEH, including the state humanities councils. The underfunding is not a problem of federal policy alone, though. Foundation and state government funding for the humanities is also scarce in this era of economic constraints. Knowing how small the pie is, all members of the family begin to quietly calculate how to get the biggest slice they think they can manage, which can lead to unhealthy habits of turf protection and defensiveness. This is a reality. But let me now step back onto the main path and return to thank you number 2 to say that it is not only scarce resources that have prevented the humanities community from collaborating as vigorously as the times require. It can also stem from a lack of understanding of each other's aims and values. Public humanities programs and practices can, on occasion, appear to academic humanists to lack seriousness. Scholars and academic institutions can sometimes seem elitist and condescending to public audiences. These are largely misconceptions, but they are allowed to simmer and intensify if not addressed through strenuous efforts to communicate and collaborate. The good news is that efforts to close these understanding gaps are proliferating, I believe, like never before, and the Commission report has provided a welcome boost to these efforts. Last year at about this time, the Kettering Foundation hosted a day-long conversation among a dozen people who spend their lives in various humanities institutions and organizations, libraries, museums, scholarly associations, universities, humanities councils. Throughout the day, we discussed 3 basic questions. First, the concept of the public humanities. Second, the relationship between academic research and the public humanities. and third, the relationship of the public humanities to civic life. The rich discussion explored the ideal relationship between the academic and public humanities and benefits to the public of a close collaboration between these two communities. A report on this discussion is in process, and the conversation will continue and, I hope, produce further discussion and action. The Federation of State Humanities Councils that I work for is currently deepening partnerships with Imagining America, an organization of academic institutions committed to publicly engaged scholarship, and with the Consortium of Humanities Centers and Institutes. 2 sessions at the recent Imagining America conference were devoted to discussion of successful collaborations between state councils and academic institutions, humanities centers in particular, and a session at the upcoming Federation Conference will build on that conversation. Earlier this month, the Oklahoma Humanities Council, working with the National Humanities Alliance and the Federation, convened a meeting that we hope will serve as the pilot for what we envision as a number of regional humanities working groups across the country. The kickoff meeting of this initiative included 25 representatives of academic institutions, public humanities organizations, and Native American tribes who shared information about humanities activities and events in their institutions and discussed ways of pooling efforts and resources to make humanities work in Oklahoma more visible. According to the Council Executive Director, Ann Thompson, the high-energy meeting at which most participants were learning of each other's work for the first time offered a promising beginning to what participants hope will be a long-term, fruitful relationship. These are healthy and encouraging developments, very much in keeping, I think, with the Commission's urgent call for all of us to, in the words of the report, work together to provide a much-needed, vigorous voice to champion humanistic social scientific work for every level of American society. And, I would add, to increase learning, understanding, and engagement of every American citizen. It is at that community, that individual, community, and state level that it matters most of all, I believe. Let me close with an example right here in Georgia of the tremendous benefits of doing it well. When Jamil Zeneldine, the former president of the Federation, moved to Georgia to become the head of the Georgia Humanities Council, he immediately saw a need for a resource to allow Georgians, both lifelong residents and the many, many residents who moved to Georgia from other places, to freely access the history and culture of this rich state. The Council subsequently launched the first online encyclopedia in the country in partnership with the University of Georgia Press, the University System of Georgia Galileo, and the Office of the Governor. The New Georgia Encyclopedia, a national model, now includes more than 2,000 articles and 6,000 images and has won numerous awards, including 2 from the Federation. It is used by teachers, students, tourists, and everyone who wants to know about the rich Georgia heritage. It's a true collaboration from its inception for the benefit of all the citizens of the state, and a true demonstration of the value of the humanities to the life of our nation.
Thanks, Randy. And to begin, let me say thanks again to West Georgia for hosting this event and helping us get the dialogue started. So when I was president of Georgia Tech, I had the pleasure of visiting this campus many times, and to come back now after 6 years almost and see how much work has been done here and how vibrant the campus is, it really encourages me. We have a beautiful campus and a beautiful community here. Okay, that was a lot of material. Let me first give just a little bit of insight into the Commission report and some of its activities to get to the report. Because Bob raised a very good question. We're here talking to the choir to a large extent. And the Commission really wanted to avoid that because we knew we could write a great report, but it would only speak to those like us. And we knew that wouldn't be the purpose of it. So we spent a lot of time thinking, what's the tone, what's the voice, what do we do, how do we strike a message that will resonate with the largest number of people who can really change things themselves and in their community. And that's a challenge finding the right words. Rosanna reminds us of the power of poetry, because each word does mean something, and we have to be careful in those choice of words. Lots of times committee reports don't quite come out that way, of course, because they have so many voices. But I think the report, all things considered, came out to be quite nice and serves its purpose. Now, I would comment on this in another way. At the Smithsonian, we have 19 museums and galleries and the National Zoo. And at any given time, any given year, we put on 100 new exhibitions. Some of those travel through the Sites Traveling Service that work for the Georgia Humanities Council, and through our 180 affiliate museums, 8 of which are in Georgia. And we spend a lot of time, we have to think about how we cast our exhibition. Our goal is to invite as many people into the exhibitions as possible. And some of those have possible controversy associated with it. A good one was the Hall of Human Origins, which goes back 6 million years and traces the arc of humanity. How do we get to be the humans we are? And as I've said before in other talks, about 50,000 years ago, very clearly art was a part of that arc. And it's part of who we are as human beings. But we put on, as I said, these 100 exhibitions, and so you have to think about that, because we would like to communicate with as many people as possible. In the Hall of Human Origins, we talk about evolution, straight up, straight out. We had an interdenominational council to work with us to work on that message, and we had fundamentalist folks from the Jewish sector, the Catholic sector, and the evangelical sector, working with us in ways that we could, when you're not going to stand off from the controversy or stand back from the truth, but how do you say it? And you say it in part with humor. Interesting thing. So the first thing you go into this exhibition, and it's marvelously done, it's artistically done. We have artists working with us. Some of the former species look like they're talking to you. But rather than hitting somebody over the head and saying we share 98% of our DNA with a monkey, we start off with this one. We share 65% of our DNA with a banana. Now, that sort of disarms people. It says, life has a lot of commonality regardless of what it looks like or what it is, vegetable, mineral, or mammal. And so that was part of the message. Now, the other thing we learned is people are going to get in defensive positions on some of these issues. And the best way to defuse that is to let them tell you what they think. And so at the end of most of our exhibitions today, there's a place where you can leave your comments, either written or digitally. And people can tell us, I thought this was a bunch of bunk. I did remember one woman who was walking through and just got into the Hall of Human Origins before she knew what she was in, and her 2 children were there, and she said, we don't want to go here. And the kid says, yes, we do, Mom. And did they go? So this business about how you do your messaging and getting as many people involved in these controversial issues is important. The New York Times is quoted many times. We all know their motto, all the news is fit to print. But if you read their style manual, it's a slightly different message. It says, this newspaper will end up on the breakfast table of a farming family in Iowa. What will they think? Will they read it, or will they be totally offended and turned off? So I think we have to work with the messaging, and that's important. Now, one other quick thing I want to comment on. I like to couch these issues oftentimes in a sense of urgency. If you just talk about the humanities, it's just kind of hard to think urgently about it. But one of the ways you can think about urgency is the demographics of our country. In California now, 50% of the children born there now are Hispanic. 50%. Texas is not far behind. And guess what state's very close in that group? Georgia. Georgia. Now look around. Everybody stop for a minute. Look around the audience. And look around. See who you see. Look around. Pretty much like we all look. And we have a problem. And we have a demographics problem. Because our country is changing dramatically. We have to reach people where their hearts are. We have to understand their cultures. At the Smithsonian, we just hired 6 curators to work on special contributions of Latinos in our country. Latinos have been in this country much longer than the Europeans, 400 years, and they changed this country in many ways. Asian Americans are vastly underappreciated in our population for their contributions. We have to learn to appreciate them. Our collections have to reflect that. It can't just be about Lewis and Clark. It's got to be about Cesar Chavez. And it's got to be about people who made a difference in our country, and our collections have to reflect that. So we really have to work hard on changing a culture of communicating, and I think that's a critical item. So I think it's wonderful that you're here to take part in this dialogue, and I do believe, and since I'm an engineer, I'll just comment, that young engineers can gain great advantage in studying humanities. And at Georgia Tech, we put a lot of emphasis on giving them opportunities to encounter humanities. And I know some of you out here have told me your children are going to Georgia Tech, and they've benefited from that. The funny thing is, I'm at the Smithsonian, I'm fundraising all the time, so I'm in airports all over the country. And inevitably, some kid comes up to me and hugs me, and he says, "Let me buy you a beer." That's a Georgia Tech graduate. Now, why do they care for their ex-president? I gave them the opportunity to be critical thinkers. I gave them the opportunity to have some fun, and I gave them the opportunity to broaden themselves as human beings. That's what I'm proudest of in my term at Georgia Tech. Thank you.
Let me see if I can prompt some discussion, and then you guys can just take it, okay? In any direction you wanted to. We have at the table a political scientist. We have another fellow who works for the federal government, and by the way, we're glad you're back at work for the federal government. Yeah, I know you are. Sequestered budget and all, but and we obviously have across the panel some civic and public-minded folks, and we've talked about the history of the report. But we have also seen politically, by state and nationally, we seem to be a very polarized nation politically. And I was wondering what, and this is not a challenge, Wayne, I appreciate your thought about the way you thought about the language that went into it. How much, what would you predict would be the political impact of the report? I mean, we appreciate it, as you pointed out, as Bob pointed out. How much are we going to be able to make it have an impact if we have these kinds of events and the people who come are the people who, and by the way, there's a variety of folk out here from different backgrounds, but they all understand the value of what we're talking about. Anyone who would want to, and all of you, of course, what is your prediction about what the impact is going to be in terms of what the report actually asks for? I mean, more money, for heaven's sakes.
Well, I'll say again, I think it already has had some impact by the number of responses that it has prompted. And there, I'm not talking just about the New York Times, though there's been plenty said in the New York Times about this report, but we get back at the Federation and Jamil at the State Humanities Council, we get back editorials that have appeared in small-town newspapers. People are actually paying attention to this and starting to think about how important the humanities are, even in their own communities. So I think it is having some impact in that regard.
We did have a rollout. The first rollout was in Washington, D.C. Yeah. And quite a few members of Congress showed up. The interesting thing is a large number of members of the Congress had liberal arts degrees, at least in their first degree. This is not an odd subject to them. This is a very real subject. And they certainly also understand it relates to the education of their children in their states. Now they'll take different issues on that, and I certainly agree with Bob. I think we're over-testing now against standards and things like that, so you have to have a much more nuanced position. But there is a lot of interest in Congress. Congress is gridlocked because right now there's no ability to compromise. There's a will to compromise, because I talked to lots of members of Congress, and most of them are really very thoughtful members of Congress. But right now the gridlock is there, and until you find a way to break that gridlock and somebody does something courageous. We had Congressman Steve Latourette, great Republican, who was a member of our Board of Regents, and he resigned. He said, "I just can't take it anymore." And he's out campaigning to get compromise back into the system. He's a great guy and a great historian, as a matter of fact. So there is a receptiveness to the message, but the gridlock is preventing it from happening. And so, you remember that movie or what it was, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore? That's where we need to be. We need to be leaning out the window and say, this is stupid, and you're not going to balance your budget by cutting the Smithsonian or taking, the Georgia Humanities Council did get $250,000 from the state of Georgia, and they got cut by $200,000. Now that didn't solve the budget problem in the state of Georgia. It was obviously a statement. That was foolish, because now my hometown, Douglas, Georgia, small towns all over the state are denied the opportunity to have cultural programs that the Smithsonian will work with the council to bring to them. And so it's shooting yourself in the foot when you do that. And we've got to say, this is ridiculous. Don't do this anymore.
Bob or Rosanna?
Well, I'm not in a position to know whether this is going to have an impact or not, but I'll say something perhaps slightly related, that in my life as a wandering troubadour around this country and a teacher, and I've taught not only in universities all my life, but I teach in prisons, and I teach in summer programs for other programs for high school teachers. That's why I believe so strongly that as I said, is one ecosystem. Well, in my wanderings, what I find is a huge hunger for and love for what we generally call the humanities in this country. And it's happening outside of the schools. It's happening in book clubs. It's happening in people going to the movies and wanting to talk about the movies. It's people who come to poetry readings and write poetry and go to poetry slams. It's happening in people who get together to play in string quartets, just little at home or in little groups. We need, Homo sapiens, we're wired, we want to know stories, we want to know what happened next. It's gossip, we love gossip. And we like to dance, and we like to sing, we express ourselves. And this is all, in one weird sense, I think, thriving in this country, but it's not being supported by the institutions or some of the political leaders. And so I find it a very bizarre situation. The arts are, in a strange way, the arts and humanities flourishing, but they're not being supported by some of the very institutions that should be supporting them.
I guess just my 2 cents, more of a question. This is one area, the humanities, where both parties should be able to compromise. It's a non-issue. So I'm just curious, what type of lobbying or education is there to bring those outlying senators and representatives into the fold? The Jeff Sessions of the world.
Well, Jeff is a fellow Southerner, so I won't comment on that. But I think the challenge is it's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight. And that's why this report is very important. It started something that didn't exist. It started a dialogue, and it has caught fire. You can see people want to understand this and understand what's happening. Because many times we're in this country with the 24-hour news cycle, and we don't realize things are happening that are slowly happening. And I get that because I have a geology minor. And things that happen slowly, you can wear mountains down and you can lift them up because they just happen very slowly and you don't see them. Well, that's what happened to the humanities. It happened so slowly, we didn't realize it was happening. Now we have to step in and say, we see it. We are shining a light on it, and something has to be done about it. And like-minded people, as well as people who can be convinced, need to get in the game.
Part of the issue is that so many people who really love the humanities don't know that that's what they love. But when you talk about how much everybody wants to know what happens next, and they don't always connect that to the humanities. I think the other thing that people really hunger for is knowing that they're not alone, and that's another thing that the humanities really does for us. It shows us, no, we've been through this before, or this is something people are going through all over the globe. This is very comforting, and people want that reassurance, but they don't always say that's the humanities.
There's so much response to this report as you're describing it to this point, but I wonder from time to time, if Robert Penn Warren said that the national rhythm in America tends to swing between complacency and panic, so that we're never quite. And this discussion now follows several years of this wave of discussion about STEM education. And it seems to me that as important as that is, and my friend Farouk Khan and fellow Dean of Sciences and Math here, and he and I talk a great deal about how we can integrate programs from time to time. But at the national level, we seem to get a hold of something, and we call it, especially if we can give it an acronym, like STEM, and it becomes the wave, and it's almost as if we can't be reasonable about it. It has to be everything all of a sudden. But now this discussion comes in that wave, and the report speaks a great deal about the importance of liberal arts education, including the sciences. How do we have that conversation beyond the report now about integrating these essential areas of knowledge, of connecting them wherever possible.
One quick one, since
Sure.
we're still into the politics game a little bit. Again, another bipartisan effort. Recently, a bipartisan group created a STEAM caucus
Right.
with the A standing for arts. And this is a bipartisan group of members of Congress who said we have to understand arts and math and science and engineering inform each other, and they have common creative roots, and that they then stimulate ability to do things that you would not do. We have a program for artists at the Smithsonian who want to come and work in our Natural History Museum because they see magnificent things that nature has done, and they learn from these things. And so I think that type of thing is very important at this point in time. And Congress, I think, is willing to listen. I will say I gave a talk, I've been giving talks on STEAM, which we do a lot of it at the Smithsonian. And I had a member of the audience stand up and say, it's not the arts, dummy, it's agriculture. So there's somebody else out there with STEAM.
Okay, anything else?
May I just add, to answer your question, to educate a lot more people about what's going on in humanities, we have to bring in more faculty from different disciplines to begin to work together. And those with humanities backgrounds who might not be in academia.
Okay. Anything else you're prompted to say before we ask these folks out here what they want to say? Okay, we have someone with a microphone in the back who will find you if you would like to ask a question or make a comment on the panel discussion. Maybe we'll have two people, one per aisle. So.
Thanks. My name is Bob Snelling. I live in Douglasville, Georgia, and I'm here at the kind invitation of Dean Hendricks. I thank you for the invitation to be here, and I am more than fascinated at all that you have shared about the report that finally captured my attention this afternoon at about 3:30 after work. But I did read the summary report, and as I began to get prepared for this symposium a little bit tonight, I would ask you all to address one of my concerns with the report. I like it overall. It's a good start. I love hearing you all talk about it's beginning a dialogue that we haven't had across the country for a while. But my mind went back to Teddy Roosevelt, who said, to educate a child in mind and not morals is to create a menace to society. My mind went back to Alec de Tocqueville, who came to the United States at least 200 years ago. I think he was a French philosopher, I'm not sure. And he made the comment that America is great because first she is good, and when America stops being good, she will cease to be great. Had the opportunity and the privilege to meet Jamil Zanaldine about 10 or 12 years ago when Georgia finally passed a character education law where, rather than educating in only the humanities, natural sciences, social sciences, etc., the state finally recognized the need to teach right and wrong, moral character. And Dr. Warren particularly, I heard you use the word good 2 or 3 times in your presentation. I appreciated that. In the movie that we watched before the lights came up, there was talk about, good, which in my mind creates some sort of a moral judgment. There are things that are good, there are things that are not good. And I am curious about why this report did not place a little bit more emphasis on adding character education and ethics as part of what needs to be in this discussion.
I get on the hard ones. I think the report recognized obviously the importance, and it's more of an implicit thing than an explicit thing. Because if you read history, and you read the history of great leaders and great religious leaders for that matter, you are going to be pushed in the direction of the right character. Thomas Jefferson, when he founded the University of Virginia, got it right. He basically said, we will teach religion at the University of Virginia, but not a religion. And that's the tricky part, particularly if you're at a state institution or an institution like the Smithsonian. So Thomas Jefferson wrote a book called The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth, in the books of Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. And it's called today the Jefferson Bible. And I bought a copy of it 40 years ago. And what he felt he wanted to extract from the Bible were those things, teachings of Jesus, that taught morals. And he tried to, Jefferson was eclectic on this, but he was very clear about it. And he helped lay the foundation for all public universities, the way we operate. The campus ministries that you see on these campuses don't sit on campus land. They sit on land that the ministries own because of separation of church and state. And Jefferson thought that was a very important thing. He took a beating for that. At any rate, this Bible, I would encourage you to read it, and if you really want to buy the best one, go to Amazon and buy it from Smithsonian Books, and it'll help our revenue. But think about this. He actually tried to do it when he was president, and he wasn't able to get it done. When he was 76, 77, he was writing those letters to John Adams. And John Adams said, you tried to do this when you were president, you should do it now. And Jefferson cut these lessons out of the Bible that he thought were moral lessons that didn't have necessarily, they might be the same moral lessons you would read if you were Buddhist, in a way. There were moral lessons for this republic. And he cut these out. So in Jefferson's way, he made the book himself. He had a bookbinder in Richmond make it for him. He made the paper. He used 12 different kinds of ink, and he did it in 4 languages. And so he's 77 years old, and he cuts these same verses out in English, Greek, Latin, and French. And so in the book, you will find each of these. He edits the Bible ever so slightly in Jeffersonian way, which is kind of funny. And I actually had the opportunity in the American History Museum. We restored it. We own it, if you will, for the American people. And we had an exhibition on it. And what is interesting about it, it's traveling everywhere. Everybody wants to see what these moral lessons were. So I got the opportunity to go down in the bowels of American history where our paper conservator was taking apart these incredible pages that had been broken. And the hair stood up on the back of my neck. I said, this is the closest I'll ever get to Thomas Jefferson. There is his writing. There are his thoughts. And these are thoughts that he expressed himself late in life, and he did it, exquisitely. So I think your question really can be answered by that. Now, the other part of that question is, and I would say this is from a university or from the Smithsonian, teaching morals is not only a responsibility of an institution. It's parents, it's society, it's churches, it's social groups, and so forth. So teaching morals in thinking somehow that you would ask universities to do that and you wouldn't do the other part, I guarantee you won't get there, because a course in morals is hard to teach and very few people can teach it well. So I would suggest when you think about morals and the right things for people to know as citizens, it's all of our job, all of our job.
My 2 cents. You made a really good point. You said the teaching of character or morality is implicit in the works that we read on this campus and at Georgia Tech and elsewhere. So when you read Homer or Shakespeare, that guy named Robert Penn Warren, Plato, Aristotle, Faulkner, all those are books about morality, character. So it's there no matter what.
Other questions from the audience? Comments?
I have 2 brief, slightly unrelated questions. One is, a number of times it's come up as if most of the elected officials we have somehow are friends of the humanities, and every successful businessman knows how valuable a humanities education is. Why then does it seem to be such an uphill battle making progress here in this? That's the first question. And the second one is, sometimes there's a warning that we may be too elitist. That is, we may not be able to reach the population we're looking for because we're on the wrong page, so to speak. That's definitely true, but how do we avoid a popularization of the humanities that also brings with it certain dangers?
I had the opportunity to have a conversation in the last 2 years with a couple of our state representatives, and I was telling the story to Rosanna earlier today. And during the meeting, one kept lamenting the I don't know if this is any way an answer to your question, but maybe it'll give you guys a chance to think a minute. One kept lamenting the lack of critical thinking skills in today's college graduates. She brought it up over and over again. And the other, as soon as he learned as I was the dean of the College of Arts and Humanities, he just made a beeline for me in some ways and said, how early in their careers do you begin to talk to them about employment opportunities? And then went on to say he had an acquaintance who had recently achieved a PhD in classical studies, and his head just kind of whipped, and he said, what in the world can you do with a PhD in classical studies? And I wasn't quick enough to say, well, just about anything you can talk people into letting you do with a PhD in classical studies. And I thought about that conversation a number of times, and I said, well, here's something of our dilemma. To lament a dearth of critical thinking skills on the one hand, and to sort of diminish the origin of critical thinking skills on the other hand, the logic that we think of as it's like tearing out the central nervous system and wondering why the muscles don't still work. There's this kind of divorce, and sometimes in public life, about how these things knit together, and how, as Wayne was saying, this happened slowly. We didn't see the unraveling in some ways. So, okay, I bought you some time, so now you can respond to it.
To try to at least address the question about lowering standards by trying to reach a more popular audience, just as an example, I'd say Robert Pinsky's 3-year tenure as Poet Laureate of the United States sets a very good model, because Robert Pinsky is an immensely learned and disciplined poet, and he also has the gift of writing poetry that speaks to people who have a very wide range of experience and not necessarily any kind of advanced education. And his favorite poem project, which was one of the great successes, I would say, of the Poet Laureateship in the last few years, was to go around the country asking Americans of all kinds of backgrounds and all kinds of work and ages, what poems were their favorite poems. And what this revealed was that Americans read a lot of poetry and feel passionately about it. And perhaps some of you have seen those films that came out of the Favorite Poem Project through the Library of Congress, and they're very moving. So you have a construction worker rhapsodically reciting Whitman, and little high school kids on the top of roofs in Boston reciting, Lorca. And in a way, what Pinsky's project with the favorite poem was not to say people ought to read more poetry. It was to say, look, America, people are reading poetry, and they love it in many different ways, and you don't need an advanced degree to do it. I just mentioned that as one way in which I think it's I don't think education should be, quote, elitist, and I don't think that learning and love of the arts needs to be watered down to, I think we should respect people's basic intelligence more. I mean, that's my experience as a teacher. I demand a lot of my students, whether they're felons or graduate students at the University of Chicago, and they rise to the occasion.
I'll come back with my engineering hat on for a minute. If you think about a student who's imbued with technological expertise and so forth, it could be a scientist, it could be an engineer, it could be a business person or an architect for that matter. The interesting question is, what lasts after their education? Now, Father Guido used to have a line, which I used to love to quote, and he said, studies have shown that people only remember 5% of their college learning or material after 10 years. And he said, I'm here to tell you, for 5% of the tuition, I will teach you that 5%.
Yeah.
But what that 5% really is the humanities. When you go to Georgia Tech and you have kids take these incredible courses and learn the high end of the state of the art, that state of the art is going to change in 5 years, in 10 years. It may not exist in 10 years, but what you learn in the humanities will be in you, coming back to your point about learning the right thing. And so I think in the long run, it's what we teach young people on the humanities side that is the lasting effect. Now, we teach them critical thinking and engineering and so forth at Georgia Tech, don't get me wrong, but they have to adapt continually to changes. The moral of the world haven't changed much for good reason And if you learn them once and learn them well, you got a good chance to have it stick with you.
We have time for one more.
I really appreciate being here, and I've been very impressed by what I've heard so far. What interests me so much and causes so much concern for me is if we think of an adversarial position of science, mathematics, and the humanities, one side and the other. And I think we're blessed and privileged to have a former president of Georgia Tech here with us. But when you think of what science has done in the advance of medical science, it is amazing. However, the science that we have developed is capable of destroying the human race. And when we talk to students about that, some of them just shake their heads. They just don't know exactly how to deal with it. And I think that's one of the greatest challenges we face in our world today. At my age, I'm not going to be around here much longer, but for the younger people, we are facing that problem. And I would just be curious as to how you distinguished individuals up there look at that problem between science and humanity, and if you want to interject, morality. Now, morality is really a complex subject for the students. It's yours.
The National Endowment for the Humanities actually was founded on that very premise that that we were making tremendous advances at that time in the field of the sciences, and that we needed to be sure that we kept cultivating our moral sense, our awareness of basic values in order to keep up with the advances that were being made in science. And then, I mean, in between, I think the humanities have really fallen away in public notice, but I think we have an obligation now to make sure that we remind ourselves again, because we sure are in a period in which the scientific advances are just incredible. And if we don't hang on to the understanding of human nature to keep up with that, we're going to be in trouble.
I'd like to suggest, though, that I really don't think there's an opposition between the life of science and the life of the arts and humanities. I think that they are profoundly complementary, and that the deepest instincts of creative intelligence are shared by scientists and by humanists. And some of the best scientists I know are concerned. They sound like humanists, because they want to preserve, the scientists I know well, they want to preserve freedom of inquiry, because you can't always write a grant and say, I'm going to discover this gene tomorrow. You can't. You have to fiddle around. You have to do some daydreaming. That's how science works. It's creative too. It's deeply creative. So the scientists that I know are threatened in rather similar ways from humanists. They're feeling that their funds are being cut off, their opportunities for the creative daydreaming they need to do the work that will ultimately benefit everyone, because many of the great scientific discoveries are made by accident. I'm not a scientist, but I've got some good friends who are. Here's the scientist who can tell us.
Well, it's a very, very good question, because technology and the world the scientists today believe we've moved from the age of the Holocene, which was the recent period, 10,000 back to the end of the last ice age. So that's about 11,000 years. Because Georgia, we were pretty cold here 20,000 years ago. Sea level was down 400 feet. It was a different world, and so it got warm. But they feel that and that's a very short time period for one of the periods. So scientists today feel that this now is the age of the Anthropocene, the age of man. Man is leaving, an age in geology is defined by something leaving a permanent record in the Earth's surface that will never go away. So what falls into that domain? Radioactivity. All the bomb tests that we conducted will never go away. It will be there for almost forever. Plastic, invented in 1925, and now it's everywhere. And it's in the oceans. There are now studies done. We know now we're eating fish that have plastic pellets in them. And so we have done things to the Earth that it's like the problem with the humanities. We've done it so slowly, we don't realize what we're doing. And so you're exactly right. There are great dangers in technology. There's a book called What Technology Wants, which is kind of fun because this gentleman spent 2 years with the Amish, and he said the Amish get it right. When the new technology comes along, the idea is presented to the elders, and the elders say, well, Reverend Jones, he said, you go home and you try it. We won't let anybody else try it, but you try it for about 6 months and come back and tell us what you think. And they come back and say, well, it was good for this, but it was really bad for the community. And they say, the elders will say, let's wait a while, and we'll do this later. We try to rush to adapt new technology, and it's controlling our lives. It's driving evolution. It's really driving evolution today, technology is. And it's scary in a way, but NSF and other groups are creating bioethics panels, nanotechnology ethics panels, people who are watching this and trying to wrestle with these issues and bringing in humanists to work with the scientists to try to wrestle with these problems because they can overtake us in such a hurry. And so it's something we really do have to work on. It's another reason why this report is so important, because you again comes back to doing what's right, and that comes from understanding who you are and what your culture is.
There is no way I can answer that question in less than 10 minutes. So I'll just say this. There is a tension or a split between the natural sciences and the so-called humanities in the West, and that can be traced back 500 years to around 1500. So thinkers like Descartes and Bacon help create that split. I'll just leave that hanging out there. What's the solution? And I don't have a simple solution other than to state a fact, which is many of our students on this campus in the philosophy department and political science read the fundamental book of the West, in addition to the Bible, which is Plato's Republic. And that book is important because that's where this whole conversation about the humanities, sciences, math, the gods, morality began. I mean, it's the fundamental book. So my point is there a problem? Probably. Is there a solution? Plato's Republic. If you want to jump ahead, my favorite author, I just came back from a conference talking about this for 2 days. My favorite author is a guy named Walker Percy. And there was a big conference down in New Orleans, and he spent almost his entire life thinking about this exact problem. So I just recommend Walker Percy.
I would be remiss, we're going to have to move toward an end now. Thank you all for being here. If I did not thank members of my staff, Harry Nelson, Christy Gamble, and Jessica Dunham for their hard work in helping us bring this all together. Christy and Jessica spent most of the day in this building helping to get it. In fact, Jessica is still here. She is with us. And she was the lady behind the screen you couldn't see running the film earlier, so we're doing that. Wayne, Rosanna, Bob, Esther, it's been a marvelous experience. We're honored that you're here. Thank you very much. And thanks to all of you for coming out. Have a good evening.